Hello, welcome back. I'm Jasmine, and in my last video, we talked all about variables and constants, and we got the basic idea of Java coding. But now we're going to dive right into our next chapter, loops. What is a loop? Well, in coding, when we want a statement to be executed over and over again, we use a loop. Now there are three types of loops in Java: a while loop, a do-while loop, and a for loop. But before we actually get into loops, I'm going to talk about counters or accumulators. A counter keeps track of how many times a loop has actually run in the code. So every time a statement is executed in a loop, that number gets stored, and then in the end, it gets added up and gets displayed. We're going to be using a counter in every loop that we're going to talk about. So let's start with the basic one, the while loop. First things first, you're going to want to declare all your variables. So just type in integer num for number. We're going to set it to 0. Now, a while loop is a type of Boolean expression. That means it executes a true statement over and over again, like a loop, until it becomes false. How this would look like is you would type in while, and then your condition, which is num is less than 5. And then you're going to add your squiggly bracket. And then we're going to set our statement, which is going to be num plus or equal to 1. And then we're going to type in system.outprint num to display what we're about to run, basically. And basically in this code, we're telling it to start counting up by 1 until it reaches to 5. And once it does get to 5, it's going to stop. Let's give it a go. And just like that. What happened is that when it was counting up by 1 with this counter, the value of num is true because it's less than 5. But once it got to 5, it stopped. That's basically the while loop. Now let's say that the statement never becomes false. The loop would actually keep running over and over again, and it would be in something called an infinite loop. Here's an example. In this code, the number is never going to be greater than 0, and so it just stops running. To stop this, you could just look back at your code and make sure you're reading it properly to check if there are any errors. Now there are two types of errors that can cause this loop, a syntax and a logic error. A syntax error would be like putting a semicolon in the wrong place. And a logic error is completely messing up the code, like this. These errors can really drive you insane because even the tiniest little mistakes, like a misspelled word, can mess up your whole code. Now, let's say we want to get a value that's less than 5 only when using a loop. We don't want anything greater than 5. We would then use a do-while loop. The do-while code is an alternative form of the while statement. In the do-while, you're executing the statement first and then the condition is checked. Let's try an example. So what this does is it asks the user for a value less than 5, and if it's not, it's going to keep asking until a value less than 5 is entered. Let's try it. Now, if we were to type a number greater than 5, like 12, it's going to keep asking. 10, it's going to keep asking. But if we type in, let's say 4, it's going to stop. So it's going to keep asking until a value less than 5 is entered. And that's basically the main idea of a do-while statement. The last one we're going to be talking about is a for statement. So a for statement is a loop that executes a statement a certain amount of times. It uses a counter in the loop itself and not as a statement. Here's an example. In a for statement, we're declaring a variable inside the brackets, but when we do that, we can only use that variable in the loop only. Now, when we're declaring the variable, we're also going to set it to 1 because we're going to want the counter to start at 1 and then go up. And then this part right here is going to start counting up until it reaches to 10. And then that's when it will stop. And this last part right here is something called an increment. And it basically tells us to count up. And we can change it to also count down by putting a minus instead of plus, like that. Now let's give it a try. As you can see, it counts all the way up to 10 and then it stops. And that's basically the for statements. The last thing before we end it, we're going to talk about flags, or sentinels. We usually use flags in while loops. Let's see how this would work. So we would declare our number, our variable, and then we would declare our flag, and we're going to set it to 0. When we're declaring a flag, we give it a value that a user can type in to stop the loop. So like an exclamation mark or 0. Nothing that will confuse them. And when we type it into the loop, we're saying that when the user value does not equal the flag, we want it to keep running the loop. But when the flag is entered, the loop stops. So let's give it a try. We could type in as many numbers as we want. And it will keep going until we type in the flag, which is 0. So if we type it in, it stops. And that's basically the flags. And we're finally done. That's the chapter all about loops. Thanks for watching my video, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. Peace.